Maria Santos stood barely 5 feet tall in her military boots, her small frame dwarfed by the towering Marines around her at Camp Pendleton. At 22 years old, she had joined the Marines not because anyone expected her to, but because something deep inside her burned with the need to serve her country. Her parents had immigrated from Guatemala when she was 3 years old, working multiple jobs to give their daughter opportunities they never had. The other recruits had looked at her with barely concealed amusement during basic training. Tiny became her unofficial nickname, though never said with malice. The drill sergeants pushed her twice as hard, knowing that in combat, size wouldn't matter if heart and determination were lacking. Maria never complained, never asked for special treatment, and never backed down from a challenge. During weapons training, her small hands struggled with the heavy M16 rifle, but she practiced until her shoulders ached and her fingers bled. While others slept, she ran extra miles around the base, building the endurance that would later save lives. Her bunkmates would find her studying tactical manuals by flashlight, memorizing every detail about battlefield medicine and rescue operations. The laughter wasn't cruel, but it was constant. When she struggled to keep up during the obstacle course, some of the bigger Marines would chuckle and shake their heads. When she volunteered for extra duty in the medical corps, training as a combat medic, the jokes about Doc Tiny echoed through the barracks. Maria absorbed it all with a quiet smile, never letting their doubt become her doubt. Her instructor, Sergeant Rodriguez, saw something different in her. During one particularly brutal training exercise, he pulled her aside. "Santos, half these boys won't make it through their first deployment. But you," he looked into her determined brown eyes. "You've got something they don't understand yet. Heart doesn't come in sizes." Maria's family worried constantly about her choice. Her mother, Carmen, would call every week, tears in her voice as she begged her daughter to reconsider. "Mija, you're so small. Let the big boys fight the wars." But Maria's father, though concerned, understood his daughter's drive. He had worked construction for 20 years, proving daily that determination could overcome physical limitations. The day Maria received her deployment orders to Afghanistan, the mood in the barracks shifted. Real combat was different from training, and everyone knew it. Some of her fellow Marines had started to take her more seriously as they witnessed her relentless preparation and unwavering focus. She had earned respect through countless hours of studying battlefield medicine, practicing under pressure, and never giving up when others might have quit. As their unit prepared for deployment, Maria made a promise to herself. She would prove that courage didn't require broad shoulders or towering height. She would show everyone, including herself, that sometimes the smallest person could make the biggest difference. The laughter that had followed her through training would soon be replaced by something far more powerful. Respect earned through actions that would define not just her military career, but the lives of 12 brave Marines who had no idea their survival would depend on the tiny medic they had once dismissed. The transport plane carrying Maria's unit lifted off from California on a gray morning in September. As she looked down at the country she was leaving behind to defend, Maria clutched her medical bag and whispered a prayer her grandmother had taught her years ago. She didn't know that in just 3 months, that same prayer would give her strength to crawl through enemy fire to reach wounded comrades who would owe their lives to the woman they had once called Tiny. Afghanistan's harsh landscape stretched endlessly below them as their plane descended toward Bagram Air Base. The mountains looked like jagged teeth against the horizon, and Maria felt her stomach tighten with anticipation and fear. This wasn't training anymore. This was the real thing. And somewhere in those unforgiving mountains, her true test waited. The forward operating base in Helmand Province felt like another planet compared to the comfortable barracks back in California. Dust covered everything, and the constant threat of enemy fire kept everyone on edge. Maria had been deployed for 2 months, and the initial novelty of being in a combat zone had worn off, replaced by the grinding routine of patrols, guard duty, and the ever-present awareness that death could come from anywhere at any time. Her squad leader, Staff Sergeant Williams, had initially been skeptical about having a female medic, especially one as small as Maria. But she had quickly proven herself during several minor incidents, treating everything from heat exhaustion to shrapnel wounds with calm efficiency. The Marines had stopped calling her Tiny and started using her call sign, Angel, though some still questioned whether she could handle a major casualty situation. The morning of November 15th started like any other. Maria checked and rechecked her medical supplies, a ritual she performed every dawn. Extra bandages, morphine, tourniquets, and her bags were meticulously organized in her pack. Her weapon was clean and ready, though she hoped never to use it. As a medic, her job was to preserve life, not take it. Their mission seemed routine. A patrol through a village where intelligence suggested Taliban fighters might be hiding weapons. 12 Marines plus Maria formed the patrol, moving carefully through narrow streets lined with mud brick buildings. Children watched them from doorways, their eyes curious but wary. Local elders nodded respectfully but said nothing, the unspoken tension thick in the morning air. Corporal Jackson, a massive Marine from Texas who had initially been among those who doubted Maria's capabilities, walked point. Behind him, Private Morrison, barely 19 years old and, on his first deployment, clutched his rifle with nervous energy. Maria positioned herself in the middle of the formation, where she could reach wounded Marines from either direction if needed. The explosion shattered the morning calm like thunder. The lead vehicle hit an improvised explosive device planted in the road, flipping the armored truck and throwing Marines like rag dolls across the dusty street. Before anyone could react, automatic weapons fire erupted from 3 directions, turning the peaceful village into a deadly killing zone. Maria hit the ground as bullets whined overhead, her training taking over despite the chaos around her. She could hear Marines shouting, calling for help, screaming in pain. Staff Sergeant Williams was barking orders over the radio, trying to coordinate a response while enemy fire pinned them down behind whatever cover they could find. Medic! Medic! The call came from near the destroyed vehicle, where Corporal Jackson lay motionless, blood pooling beneath his massive frame. 3 other Marines were down, their cries for help barely audible over the gunfire. The distance between Maria's position and the wounded men might as well have been miles. Crossing that open ground would be suicide. Private Morrison, crouched behind a low wall near Maria, looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Doc, we can't get to them. There's too much fire." His voice shook with fear and helplessness. Other Marines echoed his assessment, shouting that any attempt to reach the wounded would result in more casualties. Maria peered around the concrete barrier she was using for cover. The wounded Marines were about 50 yards away, exposed in the middle of the street with minimal cover. Enemy muzzle flashes came from rooftops and windows, creating a crossfire that made rescue seem impossible. Every few seconds, bullets struck the ground near the wounded men, sending up small explosions of dirt and concrete fragments. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. She was small, probably not strong enough to drag men twice her size to safety. The other Marines were right. Crossing that street would be certain death. But then, she looked at Corporal Jackson, the same man who had once joked about her size, now bleeding and helpless. In that instant, all the laughter, all the doubt, all the questions about whether she belonged here crystallized into pure determination. "Cover me," she said quietly, adjusting the straps on her medical pack. "What? Doc, no way. You can't." Morrison started to protest. Maria looked at him with a calm that surprised even herself. "Those are our Marines out there. I'm going to get them." She checked her weapon one more time, said another prayer, and prepared to do something that would forever change how her unit, and she herself, viewed courage. The enemy fire continued its deadly rhythm, but Maria was no longer thinking about the bullets. She was thinking about the promise she had made to herself back in California, about the oath she had taken as a medic, and about the 12 brave men whose lives now depended on whether a small woman from Guatemala had the heart to run into hell and bring them home. Maria took a deep breath and sprinted into the open street before anyone could stop her. The world exploded around her as enemy fire focused on her small, moving figure. Bullets kicked up dust at her feet, and she could hear them cracking through the air inches from her head. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst, but her legs kept moving, carrying her toward Corporal Jackson's motionless form. She slid the last few feet like a baseball player stealing home, her body armor scraping against the rough ground as she reached the first wounded Marine. Jackson was unconscious, blood flowing from a deep gash in his thigh where shrapnel had torn through his uniform. Without hesitation, Maria ripped open her medical kit and applied a tourniquet, her small hands moving with practiced precision even as bullets continued to fly around them. "Jackson, can you hear me?" she shouted over the gunfire. His eyelids fluttered, and he looked at her with confusion and pain. "Angel, what are you doing here?" "My job," she replied simply, injecting him with morphine for the pain. "Can you move?" He tried to sit up, but collapsed back down. "My leg. I can't feel my leg." Maria looked around quickly. Private Morrison and another Marine, Kelly, were about 20 feet away, both wounded but conscious. Further down the street, she could see more Marines scattered behind whatever cover they could find, some clearly hurt, but unable to move to safety. The enemy fire was intense, but she noticed a pattern. The shooters had to reload, giving her small windows of opportunity. "Listen to me, Jackson," she said, grabbing his tactical vest. "I'm going to get you to that building." She pointed to a partially destroyed structure about 30 yards away where other Marines had taken cover. "When I say move, you help me as much as you can." Jackson, who outweighed Maria by nearly 100 pounds, looked at her with disbelief. "Doc, you can't carry me. I'm too heavy." Maria's jaw set with determination. "We're about to find out." She waited for a lull in the gunfire, then threw Jackson's arm around her shoulder and began dragging him across the ground. Her small frame strained under his weight, but adrenaline and sheer willpower kept her moving. Jackson used his good leg to help push, and together they made slow, agonizing progress towards safety. Enemy bullets struck the ground around them, but Maria refused to stop. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her back felt like it was breaking, but she kept moving. Step by step, inch by inch, she pulled the wounded Marine to safety. When they finally reached cover, Jackson was crying, not from pain, but from amazement at what the tiny medic had just accomplished. "One down, 11 to go," Maria panted, already planning her next move. Staff Sergeant Williams grabbed her arm. "Santos, you can't keep doing this. You'll get yourself killed." Maria looked at him with eyes that burned with purpose. "Sir, with respect, those Marines out there would do the same for me. I'm not leaving anyone behind." Before he could stop her, she was moving again. This time she went for Morrison and Kelly, who were wounded but mobile. She low-crawled to their position, staying below the line of enemy fire, and quickly assessed their injuries. Morrison had taken shrapnel in his shoulder, while Kelly had a bullet wound in his arm. "Can you walk?" she asked Morrison. He nodded, grimacing in pain. "Yeah, Doc, I think so." "Good. Kelly, you lean on Morrison. I'll cover you both. When I give the signal, we move to that doorway." She pointed to another position closer to friendly lines. The three of them made the dash together, Maria providing covering fire with her sidearm while helping support Kelly. More Marines in secure positions began laying down suppressive fire, giving Maria's rescue efforts better protection. One by one, she made trip after trip into the danger zone, each time pulling another wounded Marine to safety. Private Rodriguez had a serious head wound that left him semi-conscious. Maria had to carry him completely, her small frame straining against his weight as she stumbled across the open ground. Sergeant Thompson was trapped under debris from the explosion. Maria spent precious minutes digging him out by hand while bullets flew overhead, then dragged him to safety with help from Marines who provided covering fire. Each rescue mission required her to cross that deadly street again, and each time the enemy seemed to anticipate her route. But Maria had studied the battlefield carefully, varying her approach and timing to stay unpredictable. Her small size, which had once been a source of ridicule, now became an advantage. She presented a harder target and could move through spaces that would be impossible for larger Marines. By the time air support arrived and silenced the enemy positions, Maria had successfully evacuated all 12 wounded Marines from the kill zone. Some required immediate surgery and were helicoptered to larger medical facilities, but all would survive. As the dust settled and the shooting stopped, the Marines who had once laughed at her small stature looked at her with something approaching awe. Corporal Jackson, now stabilized and awaiting medical evacuation, grabbed Maria's hand as she checked his bandages one final time. "Doc," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you my life." "We all do." Maria smiled, exhausted but fulfilled. "You don't owe me anything, Jackson. We're Marines. This is what we do for each other." Later that evening, as medics continued treating the wounded, Staff Sergeant Williams pulled Maria aside. "Santos, I've put you in for a medal. What you did today? I've been in combat for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it." Maria shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did my job, Sergeant." "No," Williams said firmly. "You did a lot more than that. You saved 12 lives today. Every one of those Marines is going home to their families because of you." 3 months later, Maria Santos stood in a ceremony at Camp Pendleton, wearing her dress blues as a general pinned the Navy Cross to her chest, the second highest military decoration for valor in combat. In the audience sat the 12 Marines she had saved, along with their families who had traveled from across the country to honor the small woman who had given them back their sons, husbands, and fathers. When the laughter had followed her through training, Maria had promised herself she would prove that courage came in all sizes. On a dusty street in Afghanistan, facing impossible odds and deadly enemy fire, she had kept that promise. The Marines who had once called her Tiny now spoke her name with reverence, knowing that sometimes the biggest heroes come in the smallest packages. As Maria looked out at the faces of the Marines she had saved, she thought about her grandmother's prayer and smiled. She had found her purpose, not in spite of her size, but because of the enormous heart that beat within her small frame. The laughter had stopped long ago, replaced by something far more valuable, the knowledge that when it mattered most, she had been exactly who she needed to be.